There's this one quote from Janis Joplin that it tells you everything you need to know about her. It's this profound contradiction, right? This massive gap between unbelievable public adoration and this just crushing private loneliness. And that contradiction, that's the story we're getting into today. So today, we're digging into the life of an absolute legend, a woman who, when you really look at it, was two different people living in one body. You had the invincible rock goddess everyone saw on stage, and then there was the wounded girl from Port Arthur, Texas, that, she could just never quite escape. And yeah, it really all starts right there in her hometown. I mean, you got to picture it. Port Arthur, Texas in the 1950s. A super conservative oil refinery town, basically the last place you'd want to be if you were a girl destined to be, well, different. And the cruelty she dealt with there, it basically forged this identity that she spent the rest of her life desperately trying to outrun. I mean, look at this. The disconnect is just staggering. Her classmates, they would literally throw pennies at her in the halls. They called her these awful, awful names. And for what? For being an artist? For listening to blues legends like Bessie Smith, reading poetry, and get this, for speaking out against segregation when pretty much no one else dared to. She was so far ahead of her time, and man, did she pay a brutal price for it.
Okay, so this is where it gets really shocking. One of the main people tormenting her was a name you probably know, especially if you're a sports fan. Jimmy Johnson. Yeah, that Jimmy Johnson, the one who coached the Dallas Cowboys to 2 Super Bowls. He admitted it himself in his own book that he and his football buddies specifically targeted her. I mean, they groped her, they spread these disgusting, completely made-up rumors, and he said they did it all just to humiliate her.
And you think it would get better in college, right? Nope. The cruelty followed her. When she got to the University of Texas at Austin, her whole vibe, going to class barefoot, dyeing her hair orange, it just made her a target all over again. It got so bad that a fraternity on campus actually started a campaign to nominate her for their Ugliest Man on Campus contest. I mean, can you even imagine?
So she didn't win this horrible contest, but the damage was done. The humiliation was just devastating. A friend tried to make her feel better, saying, "Janis, you're better than them." And her response, it's just shattering. Then why are they winning? That question, it just hung over her for the rest of her life. A week after that, she was done. She dropped out, stuck out her thumb, and hitchhiked to San Francisco. Texas, she decided, just wasn't good enough for her anymore.
So in San Francisco, she starts building this armor. She takes all that pain from Port Arthur, all that hurt, and she channels it into this whole new persona, this wild, bottle-swigging, screaming force of nature that the world would soon know as Janis Joplin. But you gotta understand, the rock goddess, it wasn't just an act. It was a survival mechanism, pure and simple. And Monterey Pop, this is the moment. This is where that persona just explodes onto the world stage. Think about it. She's 24 years old, and basically nobody outside of the Bay Area has a clue who she is. Her band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, they get up and play a set so unbelievably explosive that the festival organizers were like, whoa, 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 you have to play again tomorrow so we can get this on film. And if you want to know what that moment was like, this says it all. As Janis is just tearing through Ball and Chain, the camera pans over to Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas in the audience. And you can see her just jaw on the floor, mouthing the word, wow. It's become one of the most legendary audience reactions ever captured on film. I mean, in that one single performance, a star wasn't just born, she detonated. But here's the crazy part. This incredible triumph, it instantly becomes a trap. Monterey gets them a huge record deal. Their album Cheap Thrills hits #1 for 8 weeks. Everything is amazing, right? But then the posters start to change. It's not Big Brother anymore. It's Janis Joplin with Big Brother. Her manager sees dollar signs, pushes her to go solo, to ditch the very band that helped make her a star. So the success she craved, the thing that was supposed to prove everyone wrong, it actually ended up destroying the only real musical family she'd ever had. And this brings us right back to where we started, to that core contradiction. The more famous she got, the wider this gap became between the woman on stage and that girl from Port Arthur who still, deep down, felt like a total outcast. The rock goddess was literally conquering the world, but she couldn't conquer her own loneliness. Just try to wrap your head around that number. 25,000. The sheer scale of that energy, that love, that connection she felt pouring out from this massive crowd every single night. And she gave it right back, pouring every single ounce of her soul into it.
And then
There was this. The applause dies, the lights go down, and it's just her. And the silence. The contrast is just, it's brutal. And underneath all that bravado, all that swagger, she was still just that girl from Texas, desperately wanting her parents to be proud of her. You can see it in the letters she wrote home. Even when she's in Big Brother, right on the edge of superstardom, she's writing to her mom and dad, basically apologizing for being a disappointment and just begging them to believe how much she wanted to be a winner in their eyes. Woodstock. This should have been her crowning moment, right? Her ultimate coronation. Instead, it turned into one of her biggest professional heartbreaks. There were all these delays, and she ended up waiting backstage for 10 hours. 10 agonizing hours. So she drank, she used heroin to just get through it, and by the time she finally hit the stage at 2 in the morning, her voice was just shot. The performance was considered so bad that they cut it entirely from the movie and the soundtrack. They literally erased her from the single most important cultural event of her entire generation. So now we get to her final year. And this is where those two identities, the celebrated artist and the lonely girl, they just collide with this incredible tragic force. Creatively, she was at the absolute top of her game. But personally, she was hitting rock bottom. Just look at this timeline of her last few weeks. It shows you just how fast everything came apart. In August, she goes back home for her 10-year high school reunion, hoping for some kind of validation. And what do? They give her a gag gift, a tire, for being the one who traveled the farthest. Just so cruel. But then, just 7 weeks later, she's in the studio, and in a single take, she records the iconic Mercedes-Benz, which is pure joy. 2 days after that, she's gone. The speed of those highs and lows is dizzying. And the story of her last night, it's almost too cruel to be real. She was engaged to be married, she'd made plans for that night with her fiancé Seth, and also with her really close friend and ex-lover Peggy. But that night, both of them completely separately made other plans. See, each of them thought the other person was going to be with Janis, and neither of them bothered to call her and tell her they weren't coming. So she goes back to her hotel room expecting to see the people she loved, and she found absolutely no one. And then there's this one tiny haunting detail. After getting back to her empty room, she went down to the lobby to get change for a cigarette machine. When they found her, she was still clutching $4.50 in her hand. It's such a small, everyday detail, but it just screams how totally isolated she was at the very end. And nobody even noticed she was missing for 18 hours. It wasn't until she didn't show up for her recording session the next day that her road manager finally went to check on her. In a way, she died exactly how she lived, adored by thousands from a distance, but in the end, completely and utterly alone. Which brings us to her final incredible paradox. Just days before she died, she actually changed her will. She added a special clause setting aside $2,500 for a huge party for 200 of her friends. The invitations literally said, "Drinks are on Pearl." That was her nickname. It was like one last, desperate attempt to connect with people. A party she planned, she paid for, but one she could never attend. And so, in the end, we're left with this one big question. That rock goddess persona, it gave her fame, it gave her a voice, it gave her an escape, for sure. But was that armor, as powerful as it was, ever really enough to heal the wounds of that bullied little girl from Port Arthur? Her story seems to suggest that, well, maybe some wounds just don't ever really fade.